I am here today with Doug R., and Doug is a high school teacher.
Yep.
At Woodland Junior Senior High School.
Yep.
And he also is the most unusual high school English teacher I think I've ever met.
Hopefully we're saying that in a positive way, right?
It's absolutely positive. So, Doug, before we start talking about getting boys to read, which is the big focus, tell me about you, because I think that is so much a part of what you do.
Well, I think the first thing is I got into education late in my life. If you'd have asked me in high school or told me in high school that I was going to be a high school English teacher, I would have laughed at you because I never could have ever imagined doing that. I went to Purdue Lafayette after I graduated high school. I actually started as a chemistry major, which lasted about a year and a half. And
that's longer than I would have lasted in chemistry.
Just, it wasn't my thing. And so went a semester undecided. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. And like most major universities, they had some, I guess you'd call them classes to help you kind of figure out what you wanted to do. And what's funny is the two choices that came back were English or a florist.
Oh, my word.
Wow. And so at the time, I'm like,
a florist.
Yeah, I'm not going to be a florist.
Okay.
So I actually got my bachelor's degree in English with an emphasis on professional writing. Didn't take any education courses. So when I first graduated college, I worked for a newspaper for a while and so forth. And again, I was just kind of wandering. It wasn't what I wanted to do. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And during that time, I started working out. And I think this is the interesting part you're talking about is I got into powerlifting and was competing on a national world level, and then actually got into strongman, like you see on ESPN at 3 a.m. Lifting
exactly.
weird things, and competed in that for several years and had some moderate success at it, and was working at a gym.
Okay, so now let's stop right there, because moderate success doesn't begin to describe. You actually placed.
Yeah, the best I ever did was in 1998, which, it's hard to believe that's 23 years ago now. But I was second in the U.S. and sixth in the world.
Okay. So to me, that's like, that's not moderate success.
Okay.
That's pretty incredible. So when I think about it, I don't think about a high school English teacher being second in the U.S., sixth in the world's strongest man competition.
It usually doesn't go together.
No, it doesn't usually.
I've never had, my friends always tease me, I've never had anybody guess what I do for a living. They never guess English. They never guess teacher. And when I tell them I'm a teacher, it's usually when you teach PE and health or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, actually I teach British Lit. And they're always the weirdest looks.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was managing a gym. And just kind of had a moment of realization and epiphany that this is not where I wanted to be 20, 30 years down the road. And luckily, there was an IU extension where I was living at the time. And I went and talked to them about it and found out that that's when they first started pretty much the transition to teaching programs.
Uh-huh.
And looked into it and realized I could do it in about a year and a half. What was really interesting was I had called my mother. I'm a mama's boy, I'm not going to lie about it. And her exact words to me were, I wondered how long it was going to take you to figure out that you needed to be a teacher.
Wow.
Because my mom was a nurse, but she was involved in education as well.
That's incredible.
And so I moved back to Fort Wayne and got my teaching license and started teaching high school English. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Same school the whole time?
No, I started in Fort Wayne Community.
Okay.
I taught at Wayne my first year,
okay,
which was a blessing because I actually had done my student teaching there.
Okay.
So I was able to slide into a position there, which was nice. And then I got RIFT, reduced in force,
Sure.
which is typical. Got hired back in Fort Wayne Community Schools. I taught at Elmhurst for 4 years, which unfortunately Elmhurst is no longer even around.
Right.
And I was not looking to leave Fort Wayne Community. I was very happy. I was happy at Elmhurst, but the job came open at Woodland, and through a friend of a friend, and I thought, well, it can't hurt to interview.
Sure.
And I interviewed, and they offered me the job, and it was one of those, what do I do? And several people told me I should take it, and so I've been there now 15 years. So
wow.
This is my 20th year.
And you teach British Lit?
Yeah, well, I teach mainly seniors,
okay.
Which is a British Lit focus. Obviously licensed. I think my license is 5 through 12.
Okay.
But focus heavy on the seniors. Like this year, I did have one section of juniors, and then I teach several electives. I teach speech debate. I teach creative writing, and then I created a course at our school 3-4 years ago called Film Lit.
Oh, wow. Now, that would be what I'd be very interested in.
Yeah, it was interesting because our guidance director at the time was looking at the course catalog for the district.
Sure.
And it was actually listed as a course, but nobody taught it.
Right.
So he came to me and said, hey, would you be interested in teaching this?
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, yeah, as long as we can do it right, we can get the books and so forth. And it's been a very successful, popular class at our school.
About how many?
We do 5 books through the semester.
Okay.
And basically we read the book, we watch the movie, and we talk about choices that a screenwriter would do, director would do different from an author. And I specifically pick books that have major differences in them. So,
that's good.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. And the whole British Lit thing because again, besides the fact that you don't look like an English teacher, you don't look like a British Lit teacher.
Yeah, and it's funny because in my career, I've taught every grade, 9 through 12, and I enjoy the senior stuff the most because I love the material.
And you have a favorite author?
My favorite author of all time is Harper Lee. To Kill a Mockingbird is by far my favorite book. Which
brings out a very interesting thing that not everybody knows about you.
Yeah.
All right, so go ahead. I mean, I think that's pretty incredible.
Well, I think most people can see on the camera I have lots of tattoos. I have a leg sleeve of To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah, it's the courtrooms, one of the courtrooms.
Yeah, it's basically a montage. There's Atticus in the courtroom. There's Boo Radley. There's the tree. There's there's an actual mockingbird and so forth. So
yeah. So to me, I think that right there, you're trying to get guys' attention, and that just says this is something I believe in. I believe in this enough that I'm getting it tattooed on my body.
It's the power of literature to me is amazing because I was that kid in high school. I didn't enjoy reading, and I was against I'm not going to read that.
Yeah.
And
why do you think you didn't enjoy reading in high school?
I think it's what I tell my kids. I just hadn't read the right book.
See, that's something that I reinforce over and over and over. It's not just reading. It's allowing kids to find what they're interested in reading so that the book means something to them.
Yes.
I was the kid that grew up reading the back of cereal boxes. I read everything I could read. Mm-hmm. And I will never forget, one time I'm in bed, supposed to be asleep, had the covers pulled over my head, had a flashlight, and I'm reading a book. I don't know what it was.
Right.
And my mom came in and saw the flashlight through the covers. I didn't think she could see that.
Right.
And she said to me, you don't ever have to hide the fact that you're reading. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. So for me, reading has always been a big thing.
Yeah.
But I also understand the reluctant reader, which many times comes about because people try to force students or kids into a box. You've got to read this classic piece, or you've got to read this person, and it's also about who are you interested in.
Right. I tell kids all the time, I have open discussions, honest discussions with my kids, and that's the one thing I hope most of my students would tell you. I'm going to be 100% honest with them at all times, even if it's something they don't want to hear. And I tell them, hey, as an English major in college, there were plenty of classics that I read that weren't my cup of tea. I did not enjoy it. Doesn't mean they weren't good books. And I tell kids that all the time too. I'm like, I'm okay if you read a book and tell me you didn't like it for whatever reason. Don't tell me a book is stupid.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Right. I'm with you on that.
So the turning point for me was, I can't remember if it was my freshman or my sophomore year in high school, but I'll never forget Mr. Grieve. He was my English teacher, which at the time when I was in high school in the 80s, having a male English teacher then was unusual. And that was when you used to have, we had it set up so you did a semester of composition and a semester of literature.
That's right. Yeah.
And I remember that we had to do an independent study project, and he let us read just about anything. And he had conferences with us. You know, what are you going to read? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't like to read, blah, 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 blah. And I'll never forget, he gave me a copy of The Stand by Stephen King, which is...
Oh, yeah.
It's 1,100 pages, I think. And he's like, I want you to read this. And I'm like, I'm not reading, let alone something that's that thick. Just the size of it, you know.
I can't... First, you know, you started out in writing. I can't imagine writing 1,100 pages.
Yeah.
But I've read a number of books that are that long. Writing it, that's an astounding thought. But... All right, so he gave you the book.
So he said to me, he's like, well, will you read the first chapter? And because I respected Mr. Greaves so much, I'm like, all right, I'll read. He's like, if you read the first chapter and you don't want to read anymore, we'll figure something out. He goes, will you read the first chapter for me? And I respected him, so yeah. And I think I read that book in like a week and a half.
Wow.
Because there was something in that book that hooked me.
Yeah.
And that's the conversation I tend to have with a lot of my students is, I get it. Not everything's going to hook you.
Yeah, that's right.
And I try to make things relative to them. You know, I'll always ask them, well, what's your favorite food? You know, it's like, well, you like that food, but if you had to eat that every day, you'd get tired of it. Or if you don't branch out and try new things, you know, think about the first time you had that food or whatever. So I really stress to kids, it's okay to read something and be like, I don't like it. You know, but you have to, I said, the things that you read that you don't like make you appreciate the things you do like even that much more.
Now, I suspect that the influence that Mr. Grieve had on you is something that you do with your students.
I hope so. I mean, I got into education because when I was working at the gym, the thing that gave me the most reward was working with young people.
Sure.
I had several high school kids that would come in and I'd train them, and seeing things click for them and seeing them being motivated. And that's what drove me in, like, you know, what could I do that would give me that full time? And it's education.
One of the things that I talk about in the book is the concept. Robert Brooks, I think, is the one who came up with this. He put a name to it and said that it's the idea of a charismatic adult, somebody who comes into the life of a child or a young person and inspires them to think differently and to understand that they can be whatever.
Yeah.
You know, they can be successful. They can be a reader. They can be a scientist. And what Mr. Grieve did for you was that he was that charismatic adult.
Exactly.
And because of that, you trusted him enough to say, all right, I'll read the first chapter.
Right.
That he knew enough about you that he knew that you were probably going to get hooked by that.
Yeah.
And so then the rest was history. I mean, it's
yep. And that's, you know, I tell my students on day one of my class, if you leave my classroom at the end of the year and all I've taught you is English, I feel like I've failed.
Sure.
Because I do want you to love literature, but that's not why I got into education. And it's to be, and I think most educators will tell you, we all have one or two or three teachers that were major influences in our lives.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And if I can, I want to be that for kids.
So, question, do you guys still teach Beowulf?
That's the thing. I start my the first unit my seniors we do Beowulf.
See, to me, that's like the perfect guy story.
And that's exactly why I teach it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do a whole thing. You know, that's the one thing I really enjoy about my district is we have a curriculum, but we have a lot of freedom within that. And I know when we first started writing our curriculum, which it's been, 10 years plus, because I was involved in that process, teachers were initially a little fearful because they thought it was going to be, you have to teach this on this day. And that's not what it is at all. And I choose the text I choose because I know I have to hook those guys.
Yeah. We
were talking before we started recording. Girls will read anything for the most part. They might not like it, but they'll read it. Guys, you got to get the hook. So that's exactly why I start my seniors. We start with Beowulf, and we start, before we even mention Beowulf, we talk about just the concept of what a hero is and a hero versus a villain, and we talk about stereotypes and how we see that in everything from classic pieces of literature to movies to comic books to TV shows to everything. And then we lead into Beowulf, which is, Vikings and monsters and so forth. And, the sad thing is you're never going to catch everybody. But I think the vast majority of, I know this much, they'll remember Beowulf.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think I look back, and it's strange because I haven't really read Beowulf again since I was a senior in high school, which was 1977. I graduated in 77. And that was back in the day where literature was second semester. So it was 1977 when I read Beowulf for the first and probably only time. But it's stuck in my head. I mean, it's always going to be there. And I always I'm not usually the guy that when a book or an author is really trendy, I don't jump for them initially. A good example for that would be the Harry Potter books.
Right.
When they first came out, I was like, I'm not so much interested in them. But then after a while, after the whole series was finished, I thought, well, everybody still talks about these books. I haven't read them yet. So maybe I've missed something. And I actually had a set. I had a whole set of them. And I thought, what's it going to hurt? And I picked up the first one and read it in about 2 days. And I said, all right, I got it. I read it.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't feel the same way about the movies. I made it through part of one of the movies, and that was it. Because for me, the books portrayed, a certain way, and I loved that. But the thing that's interesting to me, when you talk about book selection for boys, and I want to get your thoughts on this. A lot of times we have this thing, and when you look at standardized test scores, which I don't believe a whole lot in standardized tests. And as a principal, I was really good in working with teachers to help increase the scores and to perform better on the test. And it's a game. We know it's a game.
Yep.
And it's a game because the state changes the levels and changes the test and changes standards and all that. So I don't really care about that, but what I care about is how do you inspire kids to enjoy reading? That's my biggest passion, is building a culture of reading in a school. So I start thinking about that. How do you do it? How do you get reluctant readers to read? And the one thing that I've noticed is it's not so much that boys can't read, it's that they choose not to.
Right.
And why do you think, is that what you've seen as well?
Yeah, I think, what's probably one of the most rewarding things for me is to see when a book will click with a boy. When you can see where they're like, oh, like in spring semester for seniors, we do the romantic period. And the stereotypical suggestions in the curriculum are Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility. I'm like, I know my boys aren't going to read that stuff.
And I have read so many of the classics. I have not read Jane Austen. I have not read those, Sense and Sensibility. No, I can't. I tried Lorna Doone, which is like a 650-page book. I got 300 pages into it, and I said, why am I reading this?
So for me, we read Frankenstein and Dracula.
Oh, yeah.
Same period, and there were a handful of guys this year as we were reading those. Like, I'd get to a point in the period where we're stopping, and you could tell they were frustrated.
Yeah.
Because we were stopping.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I want to read more. I'm like, you're free to read more. And that's what's exciting for me as a teacher, to have a student come in and want to talk to me about the book outside of class.
Yeah.
Like, hey, Mr. R, I really like this part here and there. And I'm perfectly fine with the student telling me, yeah, I really didn't like it. Okay, why? And why didn't you like it? And most of them can verbalize why.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But, I start with Beowulf. We go right from there. We go into the Iliad. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
When we talk about Achilles and battles and so forth, we read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. We read Macbeth. I think the key thing, especially for classics like that, is showing the kids how they're relative. And that's, like I was saying before with the whole thing with Beowulf, we talk about the concept of a hero and the stereotypes of a hero. So then we get into where do we see that today in comic books or
Yeah, absolutely.
Beowulf's a trilogy. So we'll talk about other classic trilogies like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or The Hunger Games or anything like that. I'm like, they're all cherry picking elements from Beowulf. So even though Beowulf is thousands of years old, it's still relevant today. Same thing, there's voices in education. Oh, we shouldn't teach Shakespeare. It's outdated.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that because, the thing that I always found in reading Shakespeare in high school was that the first 3 days of assignments were wicked. And I hated it. I remember in 9th grade we did The Merchant of Venice.
Which is a tough one to do for freshmen.
Especially. Word. And I thought, this guy, nobody could, I don't know what language he's speaking, but it's not English. But after the first 3 days, it started to make sense. And so for me, I think that's one of the great values in reading Shakespeare is that you learn to read something that's written in a different tone and a different style and a different, the whole atmosphere of it is different. But it also lends depth to who you are as a person. I mean, I feel sorry for a person who's never read anything of Shakespeare.
Well, I think the problem is it is difficult.
Yeah.
And I think so many of our kids now is if something is maybe not even difficult, just perceived to be difficult, it's the hands up, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So I know for me, like when I teach Macbeth, first of all, we read the whole thing in class together. Because I'm honest and upfront with them. Hey, this is going to be difficult because it's Middle English.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's and these and thous. Yeah. But we read it together, and basically what we'll do is we'll read it aloud in class, and then I'll break it down to them. Okay, this great big passage, when this guy says this is what he's saying, and this is why it's important. And I've had kids before tell me that they appreciate that. Because I had the same thing. In high school, we read Shakespeare, and I was lost. And I took a Shakespeare class as an undergrad at Purdue, and the professor did exactly that. He broke everything down. I'm like, well, this makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Now I understand it. And again, the relative part of it. I mean, Macbeth is all about the consumption of power taking over somebody's mind. I'm like, if you can't relate that to what's going on in our world now.
Absolutely.
So that's what I think is important, and with my film lit class, I start with Fellowship of the Ring.
Oh, that's outstanding.
And it's funny every year because I can tell 90% of the girls are just like, ugh. They just don't care for it. But we end the semester with The Book Thief. And by the time, we read Lord of the Rings, and then we read I Am Legend.
Oh, yeah.
And then we go into Jurassic Park, and then we read Forrest Gump, and we end with The Book Thief. And I strategically did them in that order because I want to hook those guys.
Right.
And then
so they'll stay with you all the way.
And by the time we get to The Book Thief, I hope, and I'm thinking, there's that trust there.
Right.
Because if I start the semester with a book about a girl stealing books, the guys are going to be like, yeah, I'm out.
Yeah.
But I think it's that building up of trust, like, hey, I like this so far, so I'll read this one too.
Yeah. And I have to say, Fellowship of the Ring is one of my all-time favorite books. I've read the Lord of the Rings trilogy 4 times completely.
Yeah.
The Hobbit only once, because I'm not as big a fan of The Hobbit as I am of Lord of the Rings. But and that's one of the films that I think largely got it right.
Yes.
I mean, for the most part. So that was good. So let's talk about reluctant readers. The guys that fake read, the guys that, that actually do have a problem with reading. What do you do with them? How do you help them?
That's always, the $64,000 question.
Oh, yeah.
If you can solve that. So there's several things I try to do to motivate students, and especially guys, to read. Number one is the modeling aspect. Anytime I teach a novel, for the most part, I'm going to read about half of it to them in class. Just because I think that modeling is important. Going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, right? Here's this big 6'8", bald, tattooed guy.
Yeah.
And he's reading books.
Yeah.
And when we have reading outside of class, I always have assessments. But I tell them ahead of time that the assessments are basically, I call them have you read it quizzes.
Yeah.
Like if you do the reading,
Oh, yeah.
they're not tough questions.
Right.
If you don't do the reading, you're not going to be able to guess your way through it. And stereotypically what will happen is I'll have a student or two that they'll not do well on a couple quizzes, and then they kind of, okay, this is the game, and I'm okay if they look at it that way.
Sure.
I got to play to get my grade. Because, that is the one thing, advantage I have with seniors is there's some leverage there.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to graduate, this is what you got to do. And fortunately, however you want to look at it, you need my class to graduate. Right. So I'm going to expect you to read. So those are some things. And, being up front with the kids, I think, is important too. Like, hey, here's a 30-second synopsis of what this book is about without any spoilers given away.
Sure.
It's interesting because in the fall, we do all the way through Macbeth, and then we end the fall semester by reading the last lecture, which is nonfiction, Randy Pausch. And it's interesting every year when we read that because, again, I think by that time there's some trust built up, so the guys will read it. And if you haven't read that book,
It's deep.
It's deep, and it pulls on your heartstrings several places. And I have, in my copy of my book, I have little notes and so forth, like, take a second here, because there are going to be some students who are going to need, and hopefully not out and out crying, but you can just tell it's like, this is a tender moment, and it's okay to be moved that way by literature.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I saw that, I started my teaching career as teaching 6th and 7th grade at a small private school in eastern Kentucky with very poor kids, and it's in Appalachia. And one of the books that I read aloud to them, I'd never read the book myself, which was a big mistake.
Yeah.
Was Where the Red Fern Grows.
Oh, jeez.
And I'm reading this book to my students, and one of my kids in the class, Stanley, and I have a whole chapter devoted to him in the book. Stanley actually was a coon hunter. He had his own coon hounds and all this, and he did, and I thought, well, this might be a way to, kind of drag Stanley in, and so I found this book. I'd never read it before, had no idea who Wilson Rawls was, and I thought, okay, I'll read this book. I had no idea. It's like, oh man, tears. And like you said, the kids needed that. You have to pause here for a minute because you can hear it.
Well, that's like my first year I ever taught freshmen in Fort Wayne Community. There's a short story, and I can't remember the author's name, but it's called The Scarlet Ibis. And it's about two brothers, and the younger brother is handicapped. And the older brother just picks on him just ruthlessly. And at the end, it does not have a good ending as far as what happens to the brothers. And I'll never forget, I was about a day ahead reading the kids before I was teaching it. And I got to that part, and I'm like, oh, this will be interesting tomorrow. Because as I'm reading it, I'm getting choked up.
Oh, boy.
And we got to that part in class, and I'll never forget, 90% of the girls in the class were bawling. And you could tell a lot of the guys are watery-eyed. I'm like, all right, we need to stop. And I'm like, I literally walked up and down the aisle with Kleenex. I'm like, it's okay,
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's funny too because there are different times in different years when I'm reading books that I've taught before. And I'll find myself getting emotional.
Oh, yeah.
The point I'm like, okay, big guy, we don't need to get around to school that, hey, during second period, Mr. R was crying. But like one that every time I used to teach it was Of Mice and Men.
Oh, yeah.
And the end with Lenny. And every time I'd get on the page, I'm like, okay, it's coming. And in my mind, I'm telling myself, be strong, be strong, be strong, be strong, and then you see in the kids.
This is just a book.
And you see in the kids when some of them are a little bit ahead of the game and they realize what's coming. And then when it happens, and you have to give them that time to be like, okay, take this in, absorb it, And then you're always going to have some kids like, oh, but, it's the power of literature. And that's what I think is, and I talk to my kids all the time. I'm like, a book has got you when I'm reading, the movie's playing in my head.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's when I know I'm like, this is a good book because as I'm reading, it's playing in my head.
Yeah, and I do that even as an adult. And I think this is the thing that I tell people when you look at how boys read.
Mm-hmm.
One of the good ways to determine what kind of books boys are going to enjoy is what kind of books do men enjoy.
Yeah.
And, I'm a big fan of John Sanford and his great books about Lucas Davenport, who's a detective and all that kind of stuff. But one of my favorite guys, Michael Connolly, writes the Harry Bosch books. And,
Bosch books are good.
Oh my word. I just, I get wrapped up in these police stories, and then all of a sudden this TV show comes out. And I'm thinking, I am not going to like this because I have in my head what Harry Bosch looks like.
Yeah.
And when the series comes out, the guy they picked,
Titus Welliver,
and he fits the character.
He's Harry Bosch. But it's funny when it's the other way around, too, because...
like in the Lee Child book.
The example for me is in high school, I was big into Tom Clancy.
Me
Clancy
too.
books.
Absolutely.
And I remember reading Clear and Present Danger.
Yeah.
And Graham, who is the ex-CIA guy that's living down in South America.
Right.
And they describe him in the book as played linebacker for Ohio State.
Yeah.
And then you go see the movie, and nothing against this actor, but it's Willem Dafoe.
Oh, my word.
And Willem Dafoe
played linebacker for anybody.
He's like 5'6".
Yeah.
And he's a great actor.
Yeah.
But I remember being in the theater, and I'm like, okay, we're going to see Graham here any second. And he pops up, and I'm like, that's wrong.
Yeah.
That's
I did
wrong.
the same thing with The Hunt for Red October, which was the first Clancy book made into a movie. And I'm sitting there, and I'm watching the movie, and I'm thinking, Alex Baldwin is the wrong person for Jack Ryan. Why in the world didn't they pick somebody like Harrison Ford? That was exactly what I thought.
The very next one,
And then the very next one was Harrison Ford. Yeah. And I thought, okay, that's crazy. So I should have been in casting or something.
There you go.
But I don't know. Well, Doug, if you could choose one thing that your students would remember you for, what would that be?
Well, that's a good question. I hope it's just my honesty with them. I tell them day one, I'm like, I'm going to be honest, and I said before, honest with you, I said, you have to be careful what you ask me.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm not going to tell you something that's not true to make you feel better. And I tell them why. I said, because you have enough people in your life that do that now.
That's right.
Obviously, that doesn't go well with some people sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And that's okay, too. But I know that I've had several students come back to me after they graduate. And that's really the most rewarding time, is when you have a student that comes back and says, hey, this thing that you did or you said or you taught me carries on with me.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I hope, and I think that's what my students would say about me. It's just the fact, hey, Mr. R is a straight shooter. He's going to tell you the way it is. Because I think, we don't see a lot of that in our society now.
That's true.
And I think it's important too. I've had kids before like, hey, Mr. R, what can, what? And I'm like, well, you're screwing around. Why is your grade this way? It's because you're not doing your work and you need to do it. Or, I've had to have the difficult conversation with kids that will ask me for, as a senior, a lot of reference letters. And I've had kids before, I'm just like, hey,
can't do it.
Where's your grade at in my class right now? What's your behavior? You as a person,
oh yeah,
you're okay. You're respectful, but look at what your output is, and you want me to vouch for you, and and then it's only happened a couple times, but I'm not gonna, right or wrong, I'm not gonna candy coat stuff for kids because unfortunately, I don't ever want one of my kids, hopefully, to leave and then be like, hey, you didn't prepare me or you didn't tell me. Exactly. That's one thing. I teach speech and debate, and I have a lot of kids come back. Because almost everybody, if you go to a 4-year university, no matter what degree you're going to take communications.
Sure.
And they come back and they're like, man, that class was so much easier because you had prepared.
That's right.
And that's where you're like, yeah. In the back of my head, I got that little, good for me because I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So.
And I like what you said about sometimes they come back because I had a girl student that was, we're talking very quiet, never said a word in class, and, like she was scared of everybody. And she was a 6th grader. And I don't know why. And to this day, I don't know why. I asked her, I said, Kim, our bookshelves are just a disaster. Because I had all kinds of, kid books that some of them I had inherited from the teacher before me. I said, is there any way you would consider organizing all that and being like our class librarian? And she said, yeah, I'll do that. Never thought another word about it. She did that. She did that for all year. And for the next year, I didn't even remember it. I mean, it was like a little thing on the blip, a little blip on the radar for me. 25 years later, I get an email from her. Mm-hmm. She said, I am so glad I found you. And I said, really? She said, you probably don't remember me. And she told me, and yeah, I did remember her.
Right.
She said, do you remember that you asked me to be our class librarian? And I said, honestly, no.
Yeah.
I didn't remember that. She said, I started out teaching English, but she said, I have been the school librarian for the last 15 years.
That's awesome. And
she said, I love it.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay. And she said, it's because you had me do that. And I thought, okay. Thanks. That's really cool.
And it was awesome that she reached out to you and let you know that too.
That was cool.
I talk about that a lot with student teachers and young teachers. I'm like, that ripple effect, the butterfly effect.
Yep, that's right.
You never know. And a lot of times it's those kids, I call them under the radar kids.
That's it.
The kid that's in your room, never wants attention, does what they're supposed to do, gets good grades, and you have no idea how you're impacting
That's
them.
right.
I had a girl just this year, was a senior that graduated early. And I enjoyed having her in class, but she's very much under the radar kid.
Oh, yeah.
And she came back sometime in January, February, had to get something from the office, and she stopped by my room and we were talking a little bit, and she's actually taking college courses this last semester before she can graduate high school. I mean, she's a focus-driven kid. And she's like, well, hey, I got something for you. And she handed me this envelope. She goes, but you can't read it now. And I'm like, okay, and I'm thinking, I don't know, this is positive or negative, right?
Absolutely.
And she left, and I waited, and I opened it, and it was just something that I would have never picked up on. She said that she was going through a really tough time, and I had made the comment, and I don't remember saying this, but it's something that I'm sure I would have said, that, hey, sometimes in life you're going to get some crappy cards dealt to you. You got two choices. You can play them or you can just roll over. And she goes, and that meant a lot to me. And I just thought, that's a great example, and I need to say that for other people. Be like, I don't remember saying that to that girl, but that was a pivotal moment to her. And we can all think of that. I bet you if I have no idea. I hope Mr. Grieve is still alive, but I bet you if I ran into him, and he might not even remember that story of me with the book. He might, but he might not. But that was a pivotal moment for me as a student. And that's what's so awesome and rewarding about our job.
That's right.
And like that girl, 25 years later, she reaches out to you. And
I know.
I can imagine, because we're very like-minded, probably melted your heart a little bit. You're just like, wow. And she doesn't even realize how much that means to you.
That's right. So, well, thank you, Doug.
Oh, no problem. I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed working with you for 3 years and had great times. And have enjoyed talking with you on occasion since then. Thank you very much for the work that you do.
Appreciate it.
And I think the work of a teacher, especially over these last 2 years, has just been incredibly difficult. And teaching college is a different world. It's so, for us, nothing much changed. We just rolled right into fully online and went ahead. But you guys kept fighting the battle and right there. And double duty a lot of times. So thank you. Thank you for what you do.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks.